The morning sun cast long shadows across the Colorado Territory as 14-year-old Isaac Turner stood on the small hill overlooking his family's homestead, watching strange men with surveying equipment march across his land like conquerors claiming new territory. The brass instruments gleamed in the early light as they measured and marked, driving stakes into the earth that had been his home for as long as he could remember. Isaac's parents had died of typhoid fever 6 months earlier, leaving him alone on the 40-acre plot they had carved from the wilderness through years of backbreaking labor. The modest cabin they had built with their own hands still smelled like his mother's cornbread and his father's pipe tobacco. But those comforting scents were now tainted with the bitter taste of loss and uncertainty. The men working below paid no attention to the grieving boy watching from the hillside. They wore expensive suits despite the rough terrain, and their movements carried the confidence of people who were accustomed to having their orders followed without question. Isaac recognized several of them from previous visits to the homestead, representatives of the Colorado Central Railroad who had been pressuring his family to sell their land for months before the fever struck. "We're offering you a fair price, Mr. Turner," the lead surveyor had told Isaac's father during their final visit. "The railroad is coming through whether you sell or not. It would be much better for everyone if you took our offer and relocated voluntarily." Isaac's father, Jonas Turner, had been a proud man who believed deeply in the American promise that hard work and determination could build something lasting for future generations. "This land isn't for sale, gentlemen," he had replied firmly. "My wife and I have put our blood, sweat, and tears into every acre. We're not moving." The railroad men had left that day with cold smiles and promises that they would find another way to resolve the situation. Now, 6 months after Jonas Turner's death, they had apparently found their solution: simply take the land and let a 14-year-old orphan try to stop them. Isaac climbed down from his observation post and approached the survey crew, his young heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anger. The lead man, a thin individual with perfectly waxed mustaches named Cornelius Whitmore, looked up from his calculations with obvious annoyance at the interruption. "Boy, you need to clear out of here," Whitmore said dismissively. "This is railroad business now, and you're interfering with official surveying operations." "This is my land," Isaac replied, his voice cracking slightly with emotion. "My parents homesteaded this property legally. They have the papers from the territorial government." Whitmore's laugh was cold and condescending. "Had papers, boy. Past tense. The railroad has been granted eminent domain authority by the territorial legislature. Your little patch of dirt has been officially claimed for the greater good of progress and development." Isaac felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. Though whether from shock or the vibrations of the nearby work crew, he couldn't tell. "What does that mean?" "It means," Whitmore explained with obvious relish, "that your land now belongs to the Colorado Central Railroad. The territorial government has determined that a transcontinental rail line serves the public interest more than one boy's sentimental attachment to his deceased parents' farm." The surveyor reached into his jacket and produced a thick legal document covered with official seals and signatures. "This condemnation order gives us legal authority to take possession of this property immediately. You have 48 hours to remove any personal belongings, and then you need to vacate permanently." Isaac stared at the papers in numb disbelief. The words seemed to swim before his eyes. Eminent domain, public necessity, just compensation. The last phrase caught his attention, and he looked up with desperate hope. "You said just compensation. How much are you paying for the land?" Whitmore's smile became even more predatory. "The territorial assessor has determined that this property has a fair market value of $50. However, since your parents never actually completed the homesteading requirements due to their untimely deaths, the railroad is generously offering you $25 for your inconvenience." $25. Isaac's mind reeled at the insult. His parents had invested years of their lives and every penny they owned into building their homestead. The land was worth at least 10 times what the railroad was offering, and everyone involved knew it. "That's not enough," Isaac said, though even as he spoke the words, he realized how powerless he truly was. "This property is worth much more than $25. Perhaps, Whitmore agreed with mock sympathy, but that's the offer. "Take it or leave it, boy. Either way, you're leaving this land in 48 hours. As the survey crew returned to their work, Isaac walked slowly back to the cabin that had been his home for his entire life. Every room held memories that were precious beyond any monetary value. His mother teaching him to read at the kitchen table, his father showing him how to repair tools in the barn, family evenings spent around the fireplace listening to stories and making plans for the future. Now, all of those dreams were being swept away by men in expensive suits who saw his family's sacrifice as nothing more than an obstacle to their profit margins. Isaac sat on his parents' bed and wept with the helpless rage of youth, confronting the brutal realities of adult power and politics. But even as tears streamed down his face, Isaac's mind was working. His father had taught him that there was always another option, always another way to approach a problem if you were willing to think creatively and take risks. The railroad men assumed that a 14-year-old orphan would simply accept their verdict and disappear quietly into the wilderness. They were about to discover how wrong they could be. Isaac spent the remainder of the day carefully packing his parents' most precious belongings, his mother's Bible, his father's pocket watch, family photographs, and the deed to their land that Jonas Turner had guarded more carefully than gold. As he worked, he formulated a plan that was desperate, dangerous, and probably doomed to failure. But it was the only option he could see. There was a man living about 15 miles north of the homestead, a reclusive rancher named Ezra Blackwood, who had a reputation for helping people that the rest of society had forgotten. Isaac had met Blackwood only once, when the rancher had attended Jonas Turner's funeral. But something about the older man's quiet dignity and obvious grief had made a lasting impression. More importantly, Isaac remembered the stories his father had told about Ezra Blackwood's legendary stubbornness and his willingness to fight impossible battles against overwhelming odds. If anyone in the territory might be willing to help an orphaned boy stand up to the railroad, it would be the man they called the Wolf Rancher because of his unusual companion and his fierce independence. As the sun set over the Colorado mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Isaac Turner made a decision that would change his life forever. He loaded his few possessions onto his father's old horse and set out across the rugged terrain toward Ezra Blackwood's ranch, carrying with him nothing but hope and the desperate determination of youth. Behind him, the railroad surveying stakes stood like grave markers in the gathering darkness, testament to a way of life that was rapidly disappearing beneath the relentless march of progress and corporate power. But Isaac Turner was not ready to surrender without a fight, and he suspected that Ezra Blackwood might feel the same way. The boy rode through the night toward an uncertain future, guided by starlight and the fierce love he bore for his parents' memory. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and dangers, but tonight he was still fighting for everything his family had built together. The morning mist clung to the valley floor like ghostly fingers as Isaac Turner approached Ezra Blackwood's ranch, his father's old horse picking its way carefully along the rocky trail that wound through the pine-covered hills. The boy had ridden all night, driven by desperation and the fear that every passing hour brought him closer to losing his family's land forever. Blackwood's ranch was unlike anything Isaac had expected. Instead of the typical collection of weathered buildings and fenced pastures, he found a compound that seemed to blend seamlessly into the natural landscape. The main house was built of native stone and timber, its design so harmonious with the surrounding forest that it appeared to have grown from the earth itself rather than being constructed by human hands. What struck Isaac most forcefully, however, was the presence of the wolf that emerged from the shadows as he approached the main house. The animal was massive, with silver-grey fur and intelligent yellow eyes that seemed to evaluate the young visitor with almost human understanding. Isaac's horse snorted nervously and stepped sideways, but the wolf made no aggressive moves, simply watching with alert attention. "Easy, Shadow," came a voice from the porch. "The boy means no harm." Ezra Blackwood stepped into view, and Isaac was surprised by the rancher's appearance. Instead of the grizzled mountain man he had expected, Blackwood was a tall, lean figure with prematurely grey hair and eyes that held depths of experience and sorrow. He moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent decades living in harmony with the wilderness, and his clothing was practical but well-maintained. "Isaac Turner," Blackwood said, his voice carrying a warmth that immediately put the boy at ease. "I remember you from your father's funeral. You look just like Jonas did when I first met him 20 years ago." Isaac dismounted carefully, keeping one eye on the wolf while addressing the rancher. "Mr. Blackwood, I need your help. The railroad is trying to steal my family's land." Blackwood's expression darkened at the mention of the railroad. "Come inside, son. We need to talk." The interior of Blackwood's house was as impressive as its exterior, filled with handcrafted furniture and shelves lined with more books than Isaac had ever seen in one place. The wolf, Shadow, followed them inside and settled beside the fireplace with the casual familiarity of a long-time family member. "Tell me what happened," Blackwood said as he poured coffee for both of them from a pot that had been warming on the stove. Isaac related the events of the previous day, describing the survey crew's arrival and Cornelius Whitmore's dismissive treatment of his legal claims to the homestead. Blackwood listened in grim silence, his jaw tightening with anger as the story unfolded. "Eminent domain," Blackwood said when Isaac finished. "The politician's favorite weapon against anyone too weak to fight back effectively. Do you know about the railroad's plans?" Isaac asked. Blackwood walked to a large map mounted on the wall, pointing to a red line that cut diagonally across the territorial landscape. "The Colorado Central wants to build the most direct route possible between Denver and the California goldfields. Unfortunately, that means cutting right through some of the best homesteading land in the territory." Isaac studied the map and felt his heart sink as he realized the scope of what they were facing. "How many families are they displacing?" "At least 30 that I know of," Blackwood replied. "Most of them have already been forced out through various forms of legal intimidation. Your father was one of the last holdouts, and now you're apparently the final obstacle to their plans." The rancher's tone grew more intense as he continued. "The railroad has bought judges, bribed territorial legislators, and hired private security forces to deal with anyone who won't cooperate voluntarily. They're not just stealing land, Isaac. They're destroying a way of life that took generations to build." Isaac felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of the forces arrayed against him. What can one person do against all that power and money? Blackwood smiled grimly and gestured toward Shadow, who was watching the conversation with obvious intelligence. "Sometimes one person with the right allies can accomplish more than an army, son. The trick is knowing when and how to make your stand." The rancher explained that he had been tracking the railroad's activities for months, gathering evidence of their illegal tactics and building relationships with other displaced families. "I've been waiting for the right moment to strike back," he said. "Your situation might just provide the opportunity I've been looking for." "What do you mean?" Blackwood pulled out a detailed survey map of Isaac's homestead and the surrounding area. "Your father's land sits at the narrowest point of Devil's Canyon, where the railroad will have to build a bridge across Clearwater Creek. If we can prevent them from accessing that specific location, we can delay their entire project by months or even years." Isaac studied the map with growing excitement. "But how can we stop them?" "They have legal authority and armed guards. Legal authority based on fraudulent documentation," Blackwood corrected. "I've been investigating the railroad's eminent domain claims, and I've discovered several irregularities that could invalidate their seizure orders. The problem is getting a fair hearing in a territorial court system that's been corrupted by railroad money." The rancher's plan was ambitious and dangerous. Instead of fighting the railroad through legal channels that were already compromised, they would make a direct physical challenge to the company's authority by blocking access to the construction site. You mean actually get in their way? Isaac asked. Exactly. The railroad is operating under a very tight construction schedule. Every day of delay costs them thousands of dollars and puts their federal funding at risk. If we can create enough problems for them at Devil's Canyon, they might be forced to negotiate or find an alternative route. Isaac felt a surge of hope mixed with terror at the prospect of directly confronting the powerful interests that had already destroyed so many lives. What about the risk? They're not going to just let us walk away if we interfere with their operations. Blackwood's expression grew serious. I won't lie to you, son. This is dangerous business. The railroad has hired some very rough men to deal with troublemakers, and they won't hesitate to use violence if they think they can get away with it. The rancher gestured toward Shadow, who seemed to understand that he was being discussed. But they're not used to dealing with people who understand this territory as well as we do. Shadow and I have been living in these mountains for 15 years. We know every trail, every hiding place, every advantage the landscape can provide. Isaac looked at the wolf, marveling at the intelligence he saw in those yellow eyes. How did you end up with Shadow? Blackwood's face softened with memory. I found him as a pup after hunters killed his pack. He was starving and half dead, but something in his eyes reminded me of myself after I lost my own family to cholera. We saved each other, I suppose. The parallel to Isaac's own situation was unmistakable, and the boy felt a surge of connection to both the rancher and his unusual companion. Here were others who had survived devastating loss and found ways to build new lives from the wreckage of their old ones. If I agree to help you, Isaac said carefully, what exactly would we be doing? Blackwood spread out detailed maps of the canyon and construction site. Phase 1 involves gathering more evidence of the railroad's illegal activities and building support among the displaced families. Phase 2 means establishing positions in the canyon that will allow us to monitor and disrupt their operations. Phase 3, he paused significantly. Phase 3 depends on how they respond to the first two phases. Isaac studied the maps, noting the narrow passages and steep terrain that would make the canyon a natural fortress for anyone who knew how to use it effectively. When do we start? As soon as you're ready, son. But I want you to understand that once we begin this fight, there's no going back. The railroad will try to destroy us personally as well as professionally. Are you prepared for that? Isaac thought about his parents' graves on the homestead, about the dreams they had sacrificed everything to build, and about the $25 the railroad considered fair compensation for a lifetime of work and love. I'm ready, he said firmly. What do we do first? Blackwood smiled for the first time since Isaac's arrival, and Shadow's tail thumped once against the floor in what seemed like approval. First, we gather our allies. Then we show the Colorado Central Railroad that some things in this territory aren't for sale at any price. The unlikely alliance is formed, but can a boy, a rancher, and a wolf really stop the mighty railroad? Subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell to see this epic confrontation unfold. The dawn mist rose from Clearwater Creek like spirits ascending to heaven as Isaac Turner and Ezra Blackwood positioned themselves on the narrow ledge overlooking Devil's Canyon. Below them, the advance crew of the Colorado Central Railroad had arrived with their equipment, ready to begin construction of the bridge that would complete their route through the territory. 3 weeks had passed since Isaac first sought Blackwood's help, and those weeks had been filled with careful planning, intelligence gathering, and alliance building. They had contacted every displaced family within 50 miles, sharing evidence of the railroad's fraudulent eminent domain claims, and building a network of resistance that stretched across the territory. Shadow lay motionless beside his human companions, his yellow eyes fixed on the activity below with predatory intensity. The wolf had proven to be an invaluable ally, using his supernatural senses to detect approaching railroad security forces and his intimidating presence to discourage casual confrontations. "There's Whitmore," Isaac whispered, pointing toward the familiar figure of the chief surveyor as he emerged from a canvas tent near the construction site. Blackwood nodded grimly. "And there are his hired guns." Isaac counted at least a dozen armed men scattered around the work site, all of them wearing the same type of duster coats and carrying Winchester rifles. These weren't ordinary railroad workers. They were professional enforcers hired to deal with exactly the kind of resistance that Isaac and Blackwood represented. "Are you sure the territorial marshal got our message?" Isaac asked nervously. "Marshal Henderson received every piece of evidence we gathered," Blackwood confirmed. "Whether he acts on it depends on how much courage he has and how deep the railroad's influence goes." Their plan was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of directly attacking the railroad's operations, they would create a public spectacle that would draw attention to the company's illegal activities while demonstrating the human cost of their aggressive expansion. Isaac had spent the previous night writing letters to every newspaper in the territory, documenting the railroad's fraudulent eminent domain claims and their brutal treatment of homesteading families. Those letters were already being delivered by riders who had volunteered from among the displaced families, but the real impact would come from what happened in Devil's Canyon today. "Remember," Blackwood said quietly, "we're not here to start a war. We're here to make a statement that can't be ignored or covered up." Isaac nodded, though his hands trembled slightly as he checked the rifle his father had given him for his 13th birthday. He had never shot at another human being, and he desperately hoped that today wouldn't be the first time. At precisely 8 o'clock, Blackwood stood up on the ledge where he would be clearly visible to everyone in the canyon below. His voice carried with remarkable clarity in the crisp morning air. "Cornelius Whitmore," he called out. "I am Ezra Blackwood, and I'm here to inform you that this construction is taking place on illegally seized land." The activity in the canyon stopped abruptly as workers and security forces looked up toward the source of the interruption. Whitmore himself emerged from his tent with obvious anger, shading his eyes against the morning sun as he tried to locate the speaker. "Blackwood," Whitmore shouted back, "you're trespassing on railroad property. Clear out immediately or face the consequences." "This property belongs to Isaac Turner," Blackwood replied, gesturing for the boy to stand beside him. "The eminent domain order used to seize it was based on fraudulent documentation, as the territorial marshal will confirm when he arrives." Isaac felt every eye in the canyon focused on him as he stood up, and his voice cracked slightly as he added his own challenge. "My parents died for this land, and I won't let you steal it for $25. Whitmore's face flushed with rage as he realized the implications of what was happening. "You're making a serious mistake, boy. This railroad has full legal authority, and we have the means to deal with troublemakers." "Then deal with us," Blackwood replied calmly. The standoff that followed seemed to stretch for hours, though Isaac knew it could only have been minutes. The railroad security forces began moving into positions that would allow them to assault the ledge, but Blackwood had chosen their location carefully. The narrow path leading to their position could only be climbed by 1 or 2 men at a time, and Shadow's presence made even that approach extremely dangerous. "You can't stay up there forever," Whitmore called out. "And when you come down, my men will be waiting." "We're not going anywhere," Isaac replied, surprised by the strength in his own voice. "This is my land, and I'm staying on it." The sound of approaching horses interrupted the confrontation, and Isaac felt his heart leap with hope as he saw a group of riders approaching the canyon from the east. Leading them was a man wearing the distinctive badge of a territorial marshal, followed by what appeared to be reporters from several newspapers. Marshal Henderson was a tall, weathered man with the kind of steady presence that came from years of dealing with dangerous situations. He rode directly to where Whitmore was standing and dismounted with deliberate authority. "Mr. Whitmore," Henderson announced in a voice that carried throughout the canyon. "I have here a federal injunction ordering you to cease all construction activities on this property pending investigation of irregularities in your eminent domain documentation." Whitmore's face went pale as the implications hit him. "That's impossible. Our legal authority has been confirmed by the territorial government." "Your legal authority," Henderson replied, "was based on forged signatures and bribed officials. The federal government takes a very dim view of corporations that attempt to defraud homesteaders using fraudulent legal processes." Isaac felt tears of relief streaming down his face as he realized that their desperate gamble had actually worked. The evidence they had gathered, combined with the public attention generated by their stand, had forced the authorities to take action against the railroad's corruption. But Whitmore wasn't finished. "You're making a serious mistake, Marshal. The Colorado Central Railroad has powerful friends in Washington. This injunction won't stand, and everyone involved in this interference will face consequences." Henderson's expression hardened. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm placing you under arrest for conspiracy to defraud the federal government. Your powerful friends should have told you that forged federal documents is a hanging offense." As the marshal's deputies moved to arrest Whitmore and several of his associates, the railroad security forces found themselves outnumbered and outgunned by federal law enforcement. The carefully planned corporate land grab was collapsing in spectacular fashion. Isaac climbed down from the ledge and walked slowly toward the construction site, hardly able to believe that the nightmare was actually over. Marshal Henderson met him halfway, extending his hand in congratulation. "Son," the marshal said, "what you and Mr. Blackwood did here took more courage than most grown men possess. Your parents would be proud." Blackwood and Shadow joined them as the railroad workers began packing up their equipment under federal supervision. The bridge that would have completed the Colorado Central's route through Devil's Canyon would not be built, at least not on stolen land and not at the expense of honest homesteading families. "What happens now?" Isaac asked. Henderson smiled. "Now you go home to your land, and the railroad figures out how to build their line without breaking federal law. The investigation we're launching will probably result in criminal charges against several railroad executives and politicians." As the sun climbed higher over Devil's Canyon, Isaac Turner stood on the land his parents had died to protect, watching the forces that had seemed so powerful and invincible retreat in defeat and disgrace. The orphan boy who had faced seemingly impossible odds had not only saved his family's legacy, but had struck a blow for justice that would be remembered throughout the territory. Blackwood placed a fatherly hand on Isaac's shoulder as they watched the railroad men disappear into the distance. "Your father would be proud of what you accomplished here, son. You proved that sometimes the smallest voice can make the biggest difference." Shadow padded over to Isaac and nuzzled his hand, the wolf's acceptance serving as a seal of approval from the wilderness itself. The boy who had lost everything had found not just his land but a new family and a new understanding of his own strength. What an incredible victory! The power of courage and truth triumphs over corruption and greed. Smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell for more amazing tales of justice in the Old West. Share this inspiring story with everyone who believes that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things. What was your favorite moment in this epic showdown? Let us know in the comments below.